Okay. All right. So we are live. So everyone that is tuning in, I want to thank you for tuning in. For those who will be watching this later, thank you for watching. And also, hopefully, everyone will be sharing this. So this topic we're talking about today is HIV criminalization. And today I have my wonderful esteemed guest here to, help me teach on this very, very important topic and current topic today is Robert Suttle, Jada Hicks, Angela Sims, my auntie, Will Torres, and KK Blackman. All right. So for everyone, I already sent everyone the outline of, the questions that are going to be asked. So basically, just somewhat of a icebreaker just to, um, sort of to start us off on basically what we have known about this topic before, we have gotten involved in it in some type of way. So my question is, what was your prior knowledge or thought on HIV criminalization before being fully informed? What was your first initial thought, or if there was any at all? So I'm going to start with KK.
Okay, hello and good evening. So what was my prior knowledge? Um, so I've been in HIV advocacy and prevention work for it's been a while. But I think what's interesting is when I got into this work, I primarily was focused on more of the testing, right? And access to testing and, oh, let's find a cure. Not necessarily tapping into the criminalization part of it. I will say probably within the past 5 years or so, 6 years, I have been tapped in to who really is impacted by HIV criminalization laws. I'm located here in Oklahoma, and one of the things that I know for sure is that Oklahoma, just as other southern states and probably non-southern states, has criminalization laws that make it a felony for individuals who knowingly um, transmit HIV to someone else. Of course, it is something that myself and many organizations here in Oklahoma have been working to have changed because they are outdated, they're archaic. Today's data does not match the laws that were put into place some 30, 40 years ago. So it has really been my mission to ensure that not just people here in Oklahoma, but throughout the South, throughout the nation, understand what it means when we talk about HIV criminalization. What does that look like, and who it primarily impacts, and how they can get involved?
I'm on mute. Sorry, I like that response. The next person I'm going to go to is Robert.
Oh, well, I would just say my prior knowledge, I didn't have prior knowledge about HIV criminalization before, or even a thought on HIV criminalization as someone who's been impacted by that. It wasn't something that I was aware of until it actually happened to me. So that's my prior knowledge, or even thought on it, that I didn't know anything about it.
Okay. And Aunt Angie. I can't call you Angela. Just no. Aunt Angie.
Um, I had no prior knowledge of it either before. Of course, you discussing it with me till something happened with you, and I didn't even know it was a thing. Um, that's I'm along with Robert. I had no idea about any of it, but of course, after being informed by you and trying to go through it with you, is when I actually learned about it, learned how to affect you and how it affects everybody else, and um, yeah, just had not a clue.
Okay. William. you're up next.
Yes. So hi everybody. For me, I've been living with HIV for 23 years, and my focus when I found out about my diagnosis, I was basically trying to be well. So I did not have any knowledge of any criminal laws, especially I was living in Puerto Rico during that time. So there are not specific laws in Puerto Rico. So I have no idea, that wasn't in my mind. I was trying to survive. So that's basically it for me.
Mm-hmm. Okay. And we have Jada.
I feel like I'm gonna bring us on home with the theme of I literally had no idea that these laws existed before I came into this work. And I think for me, actually saying that is like an important part of my story because it actually is scary. Like I came from a background of, I'm a lawyer. I was actually an assistant district attorney, prosecuting cases, very involved in the criminal legal system, but I had never heard of these laws. I did not know that there was a way where people living with HIV could be specifically criminalized for their status. And I feel like once I actually learned about them, I was shocked by how widespread they were, really how disconnected they were about what we know about HIV today, especially about transmission. And not only that, but honestly, how harsh the laws are, because most of the times they don't require transmission. They don't require you to try to transmit to somebody, right? It's enough that you don't disclose your status and have sex. And that's a felony charge. And that just blew me away. So I feel like I really just learned so much coming in to my position at CHLP that I had no knowledge of before.
Mm-hmm. So again, for my take is I wasn't fully knowledgeable about this issue. I just knew that, again, I took it to its literal term. I never read up on the law. This was like maybe 2012 when I was diagnosed, or, maybe the following year when I became a little bit more aware of it, but again, not fully knowledgeable that, here in Arkansas, that, that law, if you knowingly, transmit, the virus or whatever, that's, I'm thinking like that's what the law meant. You knowingly, you're actually infecting someone with the virus, not actually having sex with someone and not transmitted it to them. You can wear a condom or not a condom, or, it's all about disclosure too as well here in Arkansas, as far as that the law. So if a person says you didn't tell them whatever, even though you might have told them verbally, there's no proof of that, that you told them verbally. So that is the fine line with that, with the law itself, on how the law is actually worded and what it means, the nuances of the actual law itself. And, of course, the way it's presented, especially when a charge is publicized, when someone is charged with that here in Arkansas, unfortunately it is on social media by someone, people go into the panic or, thoughts that, the way the charge is read, that someone infected them for sure with, this virus. So, that was my, knowledge of it before I became fully informed and affected, unfortunately. So my next question is, if y'all have any words or anything, who does HIV criminalization affect? That was my question right there. Who does this affect? And I'm going to start with Jada.
I actually love the makeup of this call because I'm like, who does it affect? Us, right? Like on this call. So the people who really experience the greatest impact and consequences are those who are already disproportionately impacted by the criminal legal system, or who sit at the intersections of multiple intersecting identities. So what do I mean by that? I mean Black people, I mean LGBTQ people, brown people, people who are experiencing housing insecurity or economic instability, people who engage in sex work, immigrants, people who inject drugs. those are going to be the folks who are most impacted by these laws, our communities. And so we really see and have data to show actually who is most affected by these laws. So I like to reference the Williams Institute out of UCLA. They do a lot of impact reporting on who is bearing the brunts of prosecutions. They actually recently put out a publication specifically about Black Americans and HIV criminalization. And what they found, so they have analyzed 16 states and their HIV criminalization laws. And part of that analysis is based on race. So out of those 16 states, Black Americans were arrested for HIV crimes at higher rates than their overall share of the state population. So they found that in 64% of the states, Black Americans were arrested at those higher rates than their share of people living with HIV in the state. And I feel like that's always just such alarming and staggering statistics to hear. So not only are Black folks arrested at higher rates, they're actually convicted at higher rates too. So in 75% of the states they analyzed, Black Americans were convicted at higher rates than their share of people living with HIV in the state. So all that to say, like, we know HIV criminalization is a racial justice issue. It's an immigrants' rights issue. It's a sex worker issue. It's a harm reduction issue. It's a disability justice rights issue. All of those groups that it affects and impacts the most, we intersect at varying degrees, and that is who is being targeted with these laws and these prosecutions.
I'm muted. Hey, Robert, do you want to say anything regarding this?
Oh, yeah. I just want to piggyback off what Jada said. She pretty much identified the particular groups that are impacted, but I just want to make it plain for people. It's everyday people. You know, it's all the list that Jada just mentioned, but I want to bring it home and say it's everyday people, because a lot of people will say, oh, well, I'm not a sex worker, or they frowned upon sex workers. So they automatically think that sex workers deserve that, you know. But Black people, they may say, well, I'm not gay, or I'm not this or that. Or it's everyday people. I promise you that there are many people who look like us, who look like you. For those of you who will view this at some point in a time, they look just like you and I. And that is the sort of the beauty of our work with the advocacy, is identifying the range of people from all sorts of backgrounds, from the military to just your regular person in the community who may be your cousin or another loved one, or your neighbor or friend. HIV criminalization, or these prosecutions, or the way that they're enforced, impacts everyday people, people who are uninsured, people who don't get tested for whatever reasons. Maybe they don't have a job to where they can get actual insurance to actually go get tested, or they're afraid of being stigmatized for going to a clinic, or afraid of a family member finding out that they may, in some instances, may have been exposed to HIV, or may have learned that they're living with HIV. These are people who are having to live sort of secrecy, if you will, with things that are impacting their lives. And so if you don't think that this could be you, it definitely as well could be. And just think about this for Black people, and as someone from the South, HIV impacts is very prevalent in the South. And as Jada just laid out, if you look at the enforcement of HIV criminalization laws, not only are we impacted just from contracting HIV, we're also arrested and eventually convicted, and in some instances even put on the sex offense registry, depending on what state you live in. And I mentioned Louisiana because that was one state, and now that is different now because of how the law has recently been modernized to reflect science. But there's other states like Tennessee where this has happened, Ohio, Washington State, and I feel like I'm leaving out one, and it might be South Dakota, because I either get that one mixed up. Anyway, it's at least 5 states that may require a registry on a person be required to be on the sex offense registry. So this thing goes long, wide, and deep as it impacts people's lives. And so I just wanted to drive it home with what Jada said in terms of the enforcement and how it's enforced, and that it impacts everyday people.
Okay. All right, does anyone else want to add anything?
Yes,
I think
something that I would like to add also.
Okay,
Oh,
yes.
sorry.
No, go ahead, William.
So I live in North Carolina, and when I moved here, for example, it was like an eye opener because basically in Puerto Rico, like I mentioned, we did not have criminalization laws. And when I moved to North Carolina, I moved here in 2014. Someone from this, from the public health department came to my, basically called me, say, hey, we need to like sign you up. And I'm like, sign me up for what? And it was kind of I felt like a witch hunt at the time, because for me it was like, why do I have to disclose my status? Because before the 2018, the law was like I had to mention to any sexual partner about that I was living with HIV. For me, that was an intrusion. Before, I did not have to deal with that. And that's when I first learned, for example, that each state have different laws. And how to protect myself as an individual, I had to learn like a fast track, and I needed that information. Not everybody has that information. And for example, right now in North Carolina, not one of the things that I learned is if not everybody living with HIV becomes undetectable. And that's a problem right now for some people, because currently I'm detectable, but not everybody are able to become undetectable. And that's one of the things that are in the guidelines. You have to become undetectable in order not to be able to tell your partners, your sexual partners. So those are things that we're currently working on to change the laws, that everybody can be themselves and not be in that bracket or statistics. So
All right. Anyone else?
I was just going to comment and say that to everyone's point, this HIV criminalization has not only does it disproportionately impact communities that are already disproportionately impacted, and it has a ripple effect. So when we talk about, just even access, when we talk about, things like U equals U, and, becoming undetectable, and promoting PrEP as, a means of ensuring that individuals are safeguarding themselves when they are having sex and sexual contact with someone who may be HIV positive, all of those things actually play into it. When we're looking at criminalization, it obviously puts people on a defense, kind of on defense. So then they don't want to not only just disclose to their partner, but now they're not going and seeking treatment. Now they're not wanting to just talk about it out of fear of, oh, I'm going to be prosecuted for this. Now I'm going to get a felony. And we know that, once you have a felony on your background, now there's, other things, your whole entire livelihood that is impacted. Then that, of course, prevents those conversations from even happening. So I look at it not just, the one individual, but it impacts entire communities, everyone across the board, who may know someone who is living with HIV, who may be impacted by it. It's awful to think that someone who is a person who is living with HIV can, as Will was even saying, I have to disclose this to my partner, or I have to disclose this and prevent myself from actually being prosecuted and having a felony on my background. I think it's insane to me. But this when we start talking about criminalization, it's not just isolated, and not saying anyone said that. I think that's the misconception, is that, oh, it's just isolated to that particular individual. And if someone it contracts HIV, then, oh, it's just them, when it actually impacts full communities and everyone across the board. And as Jada mentioned, when we start talking about intersections of, different populations, that that continues to, you know, like just become larger and a larger issue. So I think about things like that in terms of even the work that we're doing to get people to not only to an undetectable status, but also those who are looking to safeguard themselves, and how that stigma attached to criminalization impacts the work that we're doing overall.
I like that. So my next question is, you know, even though I asked about your knowledge, for those who may be, say, fully knowledgeable now, what is your, I would say, your experience with HIV criminalization? It can be from, you know, a supporter standpoint, the person affected, directly going to court or whatever, looking from the outside, you know, like what was your experience? And I'll go first. As far as my experience, for those who may have known, you know, already, I've been, you know, personally affected, you know, actually since 2017, not just a survivor, but a thriver, because, you know, again, during that time, of course, into 2017, you know, was out in the public on social media, you know, of course, that was very embarrassing, stuff like that. But actually going back and forth to court, you know, that was very, I would say, traumatizing to the point there where I don't remember, you know, how bad, you know, it affected me. Because again, yes, I remember going to court, but actually being in there, what they were saying, the judge was saying, the prosecutor was saying, I don't remember anything of it because it was so traumatizing, you know, every time I had to go to court. And then, of course, you know, being arrested, I've never, you know, thought I would be arrested because, again, I'm to myself. I never thought I'd be, you know, the type to, again, just be in jail. But it happened. It happened to me. So, you know, going through that process of being isolated in jail, you know, at booking, whatever, being stripped down bare naked and being sprayed down, you know, for part of intake, and having to put on these, you know, of course, this, you know, jail clothes, stuff like that, whatever. Even though I was only in there just for like maybe nearly a week and a half, again, that experience, it was something that, of course, I would not wish on my worst enemy. If I was evil, I wouldn't wish that on them. But, you know, this process, or I said that experience, you know, that day I got out of jail, I made sure to tell my story, because again, I just knew it's kind of like, I would say, not necessarily being a celebrity, but it's like taking control of the narrative. Because of course, everyone had, you know, their thoughts already, due to the charge, you know, made public on social media. And of course, there's more to that. You know, no, I did not affect anyone. You know, it's just the way, of course, it was publicized and the way it was worded, people automatically could go to that mindset, oh, this what it automatically is, which it is not. It's very nuanced, especially the way the law is written here in Arkansas. And, you know, again, I just, again, made sure I made myself public to humanize myself, because, again, for a while, for years after that, you know, I felt dehumanized. I always felt like I always had to fight for my humanity. Let the folks know I'm not a monster. This is not what it is, you know. I always felt like that. I'm to a place now, almost 10 years later, to where I feel like I don't necessarily have to do that anymore. And I am, I'll say, the silver lining in this, and grateful. I would say not necessarily grateful that it happened to me, but the good thing that came out of this, that I became connected, you know, with you all. Besides my aunt, I always been connected to her. But, you know, just being connected to Robert the next year in 2018, that's when it really started, you know, going to HINAC, this conference, that really opened my eye. Like, all these people actually here for this one cause. I never knew about, you know, this cause or fight, you know, that people were trying to modernize, you know, laws within states, stuff like that. I never knew anything that was like this. So being connected to other advocates, you know, basically like family at this point, who would have known? Again, almost 10 years later, I'm connected to Robert still. That, I would say, that is a blessing, you know, just to, you know, still have freedom. Because again, Robert did mention some of the consequences for those, you know, in certain states that have to register as a sex offender. They may, of course, have to be unfortunately sentenced. In my case, again, Arkansas, depends on how you fight. That's just a weird thing about it. because maybe, of course, years ago, for those who have been charged with this, they did go to prison. I don't know if certain ones had to register as a sex offender. I wouldn't put it past. I didn't do much research until necessarily I came along and being affected. Depending on how hard I guess you fight in court, maybe having an attorney, not a court-appointed attorney, but a public defender, but an actual attorney you actually pay for, who was actually somewhat knowledgeable or willing to be informed about this issue. They to the point to where they did not want to prosecute me for the charge itself based on how hard I fought. They decided not to prosecute for that, but they decided to add on aggravated assault. So that was, it's unfortunate. The point they decided not to want to prosecute for that says kind of somewhat a lot to me in a sense. And to where, I just had to do probation. That was it, and pay a fine. I did not have the register as a sex offender because I know I'm not one. And, did not go to prison. So my freedom, the reason why I'm doing this still, I feel like up until this time of meeting, just not do it anymore. Being an advocate is, I have my freedom. So I'm going to speak out about it or be involved in as much as I can, So, I won't go much deeper into it, but my probation is over with, been over for a couple of years now. I ain't got to do that. I'm able to still get a job. For some reason, it's not on my record. I don't know what happened, but still able to get a state job. So, hey, I'm still here. So, yeah, that's my, I would say, one-on-one experience. And I'm going to go to my aunt to see, what was, I would say, her experience for it is looking outside in.
How did it affect me? It was first jarring because when Sanjay came to me and he called me and told me, just out of the blue, I had no idea anything. Just just one of my babies. So it at first I was very shocked, and then my next mind said, okay, so what do we do? What do we got to do? What do I need to do? And I couldn't do too much except listen. He had to explain everything to me, and it was very, I can say I was very emotional. But you see, Sanjay has a great sense of humor. Y'all see that he laughed at a lot of things. He ain't really funny, but we had that, and of course love, and of course I've supported him in everything he does, anything he says or whatever. Hey, let's do it, so, and encouraging him, hey, don't get discouraged. I know that they're online and they're saying this, and honey, I was fighting with him online. But his honesty and acceptance and drive is honestly what kept me going. So it wasn't just more support for him. He was supporting me to support him. And learning about this, like I said, I had no idea about it. The laws are so, I don't have a really good word for the laws.
Outdated.
Very outdated, asinine, archaic, all those words. Mm-hmm. For HIV and criminalization, when there are so many other diseases that they haven't put on the board for, that. So for them just to pick, this, because back in the day in the 80s, they, considered it be something that you're just going to absolutely die from. You're going to, get AIDS, absolutely. And so the stigma still is there. But as far as me and how it, supporting him is been all I've ever wanted to do for Sanjay. So
I appreciate that, Aunt Angie. I do. Robert, you want to go next?
Oh, sure. And I just want to say, I think this is so beautiful the way that you, Sanjay, and your aunt Angela has laid this out in terms of what support looks like, or what the immediate reaction was, and how you felt. Because that's important. I think that's something we don't always get to hear in our movement work. And when we do, it's really like a gem, because people don't really understand the private and personal experiences that happen, and how we hear the experience of how it's affecting the individual that's going through it, but to see that it also affects families. And if, depending on where you stand in your family, if you're a provider or whatever you are, if you're being impacted, that family is being impacted as you go through these prosecution experience. I just want to make this as simple as I possibly can as I reflected on this, and that for me, as a Black young man growing up in the South, not really knowing anything about sex or about anything about diseases or public health or even the legal system, other than knowing that Black people can go to jail, I would have never thought that HIV would be another way to criminalize Black bodies. And when you understand the history, or as I learned the history of our people, of our community, and all the different communities that are represented, HIV is just another way. And that is something that I try to drive home today, to show people that. But the only way you can really know that is if you know our history, and if you understand how mass incarceration work. And I think most Black people have some idea of mass incarceration. They just don't know all the ingredients that go into it. And so we're going to throw HIV in there now as another way to do that. And so as someone who was impacted, I realized, like, I didn't create this. I didn't intend to contract HIV. I did not intend to harm someone with HIV, but yet I was blamed for allegedly exposing someone to HIV. And somehow that, stigmatization, that bias, that other people decided, they decided to put that their beliefs and everything in a policy that now impacts me as a person who didn't know anything about sex or about HIV or about anything. And then as I grew up and become active, now my life is impacted, and now I'm having this responsibility that really was supposed to be put on a system that is supposed to protect all of us. And yet I learned that the system didn't really supposed to protect me. However, the system is blaming me for something that I did not create, and then something that I did not do. However, I'm still required, because they criminalized me and prosecuted me and convicted me and put me in prison, that now I'm still responsible for taking on that blame to this day, because they have a record saying of what they say I did. And so I just want to push back and say, I do not take responsibility for HIV. I do not take responsibility for creating these laws, because why would I want to put something like that on myself? Why would I want to do that? And I want to inform people that this happened. I don't want anyone to contract HIV, and I let alone don't want someone to be prosecuted for their HIV status. And so I just want to say that for me, these disparities that we talked about, at least that we mentioned, they're, in my opinion, they're not based because of the individual. It's the system that has allowed this to happen to us, to everyday people. And it's just unfortunate that some of us in our community, that we support this because we feel like, oh yeah, they should be prosecuted, but they don't understand the nuances of these experiences. And so I frame it like that because I refuse to be to take on that as someone who seems to be responsible for in fact, they see me as a public health threat and a public safety threat. And I'm not. I've never been and never will be. But I want to push back to show how the system is allowing this to happen. And they're not trying to do anything about it. But the community, the people like us who are talking about it, which Sanjay, I appreciate your platform and how you're continuing to do this, even as your life evolved. Because this is what everyone should be doing, putting everybody on alert about something and how it happens to them.
Yeah, I definitely agree with that. Jada, Will, KK, does anyone want to chime in on this question?
I just wanted to say, may we all be blessed with an Angie. I think that is beautiful. Robert, I think you're very true in that we all know, of course, how it affects families, but being able to hear from someone that was there is not a perspective that we have very often in this movement. And so I just so appreciate you and Sanjay being willing to share that part of your story. And Robert, when you were speaking, I was just like, yes, 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 yes to all of that, right? So in the work that I do at the Center for HIV Law and Policy, we're really working to try and repeal these laws. And when that's not possible, we're trying to reform them to cause the least amount of harm as possible, really trying to apply abolitionist politics into our HIV decriminalization movement. And part of that and part of those reform efforts is doing exactly what Robert was talking about, is also trying to educate people that this is part of the system that is failing. Or in their mind, I guess actually the system is working how it's intended to work, but it is failing our communities. And so a lot of that is education. There's such a lack of education, and that is why stigma is so prevalent and perverse when we talk about HIV, is because people do not understand it. They don't know how it is transmitted, and they also don't understand these laws, right? A lot of these laws will be titled something like intentional transmission of HIV, intentional exposure. It's very misleading. Even legislators, when we're introducing bills, are saying things like, oh, so you're trying to allow people to intentionally transmit. And I'm like, that's not even required under your law. You don't even know what the law is. So we're trying to educate them on like, here's what the law is in your state. Let me tell you why it is harmful and is actually fueling the HIV epidemic, how it is fueling stigma and driving people away from testing and prevention and treatment. And how can we work if we truly, truly want to end the HIV epidemic? How can we truly rework the confines of the criminal legal system and how it applies to HIV? Because this ain't it. And so I'll just add that we work in a number of coalitions throughout the United States to do this work alongside advocates that are on the ground, people living with HIV that are local to the state, making sure that they lead the movement in terms of how they want to see the laws reformed and or repealed in their state.
Mm-hmm. Thank you for that. Anyone else? Will?
Yes, I want to, Sanjay and Robert, it's amazing your stories and how you navigate through it. I think we need that because a lot of the new generation coming up, they have no idea what's happening. They are just oblivious of things that we're living through. They even think that HIV is over for some reason. And I have heard that from people. They don't care. And as I work in public health, and for me, that's a very troubling statement when someone says, well, I'll take a pill and that's it. And I'm like, yeah, it's more than that. It's all that comes with it. It's like when you have a gift and you have to unwrap it, and there's a lot of layers in it. And that's something that I keep telling people, that we need to keep informing people. There's a lot of misinformation out there, and a lot of platforms that for example, TikTok. A lot of people go to TikTok and they get their information from TikTok. And I'm like, you need to get a better source when you want to educate yourself about health laws and that. And we need that. We need more people out there to spread the information, the good information, not only just misinformation. And I think what SERO Project is doing right now is a beautiful project. That's why I'm involved with them. And for example, HINAC, the HIV sorry, I forgot the HIV Institute for Criminalization Laws. Sorry.
HIV is not a crime.
HIV is not a crime. See, I'm just today. So the institute is I went last year, and it was a beautiful thing that I met a lot of different people, and I fell in love with that organization, and I think we need more people coming into the organization and people talking and spreading information that this is not over yet, and there's still people in jail, and we need to still talk about them and try to get them home.
Thank you, Will.
And Sanjay, if I
yeah.
may add, this is another point that came to me as Williams was talking. And I know you and I share our experience, which is important because you rarely do people hear from the person that's actually been impacted. And I know some people may feel like, well, if that person is being accused, they don't have any right to speak, you know, or their voice. Because usually when people hear about HIV criminalization, you see it on Facebook or social media, you hear from law enforcement, you know, they have that boilerplate language that they use, but they don't really give you any nuance about that situation, except that this person is, you know, being accused. But they never say, is that person undetectable? Are they in care and their treatment? Are they struggling to get access to care? You know, they don't discuss all those things. They just make it seem like you're just a criminal. And I just want to say that it's very important that we hear from everybody in these situations. And these things that William's speaking to, this is intentional. It's intentional why young people or people today don't know about this. This is all intentional until you get caught up in it. And now you're like, oh my God, what is this? And now you put on Front Street, you're shamed and blamed for something that you don't even know that happened or why it's happening or what have you. And to William's point, that many young people think HIV is not here today, and they shouldn't have to think about it, honestly, in my opinion. They shouldn't. But unfortunately, the systems that is continue to control what's going on, and as the community is really trying to do the right thing by everybody, by correcting things, we're still in the throes of what the status quo that is going to continue to happen. So until the system changes, people are going to continue to walk in this life blindfolded. People are going to continue to work in public health and not be empowered to do the right thing in public health, or even the right thing as legal professionals to represent and support people who are living with HIV in these types of matters.
Mm-hmm. Thank you for that. KK?
I don't know if I have more to add than what has already been stated, okay. But I am going to echo what everyone has said. Everyone needs an Aunt Angie. And, you know, Sanjay and Robert, you know, again, thank you so much for telling your story. As you all were talking, one of the things that I actually was thinking about was, I don't know if everyone has seen the show, The Polygamist. And everybody's been talking about it on social media. And, you know, spoiler alert, if anybody has not seen it, my apologies. But at the end, the main character winds up dying from complications related to HIV. And we see, you know, of course, it's a couple of scenes and towards the end where the wife admits that she set her cheating husband up to with a woman who had HIV, and he contracted it kind of as a way of getting back. And the interesting thing is from that, part of what I was seeing on social media was surrounding that ending, where, you know, then it became, well, that's why, you know, I don't want to have sex with people, or this is what happens. And, you know, I started seeing conversations surrounding, you know, really penalizing people for, you know, HIV and for living with it, for contracting it and things like that. And so, you know, just going along with the theme, like, this is so misleading, right? And I use that as an example because when people think of criminalization, they think of, you know, let's prosecute people like that, right? And the media and law enforcement, and, you know, when this is actually put out there into the atmosphere, like Robert was saying, those very important questions are not asked, and those responses or those answers to those questions actually help to paint a very bigger and more important story than this person has HIV and they're going around and actually infecting people with it. And so for me, when I think about it and I think about how it's impacted me, I knew a person. So I knew, not directly knew this person, but knew a person through a person who was actually in the process of getting ready to go on trial for having HIV and for, allegedly, and I always say allegedly because the person unfortunately unalived themselves before everything got to that point, and it was very, very tragic. But allegedly, they had infected about 6 different people. But when the truth actually came out, unfortunately, they weren't even here to even hear the truth and be vindicated. And so it's just things like that when we start talking about, who it really impacts at the core. It impacts us, yes, but, Robert, Sanjay, hearing you all talk about how it has directly impacted you, and, Aunt Angie being that person that's there in the corner and being that shoulder to cry on, it's not just, those that are going through it. It is those who are a part of that village. And so when we do talk about it, this is why, for me, it's important for people to know the facts. And to William's point, yes, there are people who still are out here thinking HIV is not a thing, or if I do contract HIV, I could just take a shot, or I could take a pill and I'll be fine. And, and we start, there's people who believe that, or who actually believe, that happens to them. That doesn't happen to me, even today in 2026. And so I think just even having these discussions, having people that are knowledgeable about HIV criminalization and HIV in general and how it impacts communities is important in bringing that to the forefront.
Mm-hmm. And KK, I do appreciate you for getting on there and then mentioning social media, because that's the next question actually, is basically, how to combat miseducation on social media, since that's where mainly, most people are in some sense. We know some people don't have social media. But, of course, social media does include, or media, the core of media, that includes, news, TikTok or whatever it may be, channel news or whatever. So how do we, or a way to combat miseducation? Because again, Will mentioned that, I haven't come across anyone that thinks that HIV is not a thing anymore. Of course, that's wishful thinking that it wasn't, in real life, but it's not. But, how do we, combat that? Of course, for one, of course, I mentioned that, of course, how social media works, whenever a charge is made, for this issue, they may say, the charge may say on, social media, knowingly exposing someone, the word exposing may think someone has infected that person, but we know the nuances for those who have critical thinking that's not the case. Now, for those, like Facebook, where mainly things are plastered, or, Twitter, or X is called now, or TikTok, how do we combat that? Far as, because again, for me personally, I'll go first, that just in general regarding politics or anything, yes, I'm into politics. I'm very well informed. I ain't for no bull crap. I'm gonna say, but my aunt's on, so I can't cuss too much now. But I see things, but I don't combat or respond, because again, for me personally, it is exhausting. Especially, there was a story here. Right here in Little Rock, Arkansas. Actually, there's a few stories, for the past month or so. I've seen 3 incidents to where some people have been, arrested or charged or, finally sentenced here in Arkansas regarding their HIV status. And one in particular, was broadcasted on, on their social media site, on Facebook or page, whatever, Little Rock Hood News. And it was just properly, I would say, mishandled, me personally, because again, it's like triggering, because again, that's what happened to me nearly 10 years ago. He's like, I'm seeing it right in front of my face, exactly what happened. People sharing the post, having their, nasty comments, evil comments, whatever, not understanding the nuances of the case itself or his case, in particular, because again, it wasn't just for knowingly exposing someone to HIV, which he did not. It was for other things, unfortunately, he was a habitual offender with other things, so of course, it did affect his, since his, jail time, whatever, because he was violated some other things. But other than that, people focused on the HIV and very miseducated on that issue itself. And, me just responding or wanting to respond, I decided not to, because not out of fear, not out of, miseducation. I think it's just because I did not feel like being exhausted, of combating, because there's so much ignorance we see, as far as racism or, misogynistic comments or, hateful comments in general. Just, I don't want to combat it because, again, I know it's there. I'm not naive. I know it's not going anywhere. Unfortunately, just the fact of combating it, it's exhausting. So trying to figure out what other methods that someone may have, this is a method. This is the only method I got right here is this platform to combat to combat it. But other than that, I'll let Jada go for it first.
Ooh, this is such a tough question because I really feel you on the for me, I'm like, are people really going to be educated on social media? I don't know. I think they go there to almost reinforce their stigma, and that's what makes it difficult because a lot of times too, when you're seeing something on social media, it's always these sensational stories and posts. And Sanjay, what you were saying, it really misses the nuance of HIV and HIV criminalization, because it's you don't know the facts of what has happened. You don't know whether the person took preventative measures, they could have used a condom. They could be on a treatment regime, even if they're not virally suppressed. There's always this assumption of ill intent or that the person was trying to transmit. And I think a lot of that does come from the way the posts and the news articles are written, but also I mentioned this before, but even the way that the bill is written and the way the caption of the law, how they interpret that when it says intentionally transmit HIV, even though that's not what required. And they run with that because they don't actually take the time to look up, well, what is the law in my state? And so I think it's really unfortunate. I've actually been struggling with myself. How can we kind of combat what we see on social media? I always go back to the thought that education and simple education, not something that's inaccessible or really long, but something that's really, really easy and pointed and targeted, I think is something that's helpful. And I even think sometimes saying hey, just so you know, the law in your state doesn't require that someone purposely transmitted, right? Those details matter. And I also challenge people to think about why they think an individual with HIV needs to be punished. I think we heard on this phone call, StreamYard earlier, right? No other disease is treated this way. There are plenty of people that have herpes, that have chlamydia, and you don't see them being criminalized based on that status. And I know people on social media aren't going to out themselves, but there are plenty of people that are in there bashing folks who are living with HIV who have had an STI. So I don't know that I have the best answer for this, but to say I think really targeted short answers of just so you know, there's no allegation that this person transmitted. You don't have to transmit to be prosecuted. That's not what they're saying happened here. I think something as simple as that is something that can sometimes shift the narrative.
And also for me, I do want to say something. You just mentioned something. This is me just being petty, in the sense, because you just mentioned folks who do bash, HIV itself has had an STI. And I'm gonna start asking that question. All right, y'all talking about HIV, trying to bash folks with HIV or whatever. Well, keep talking if you never had an STI. And I'm gonna name all of them and see what the response is gonna be. And they're just me being petty because I'm annoyed at this point. And I want to say I'm not saying there are people who are careless or whatever, things could have got them by mistake or whatever. you know. But yeah, I think that's a good, I would say, comeback, because again, it'll shut some people up.
Yeah. Or even asking, like, how do you know they didn't have a conversation? Are you in the bedroom? How do you know they didn't have it's on both of them to ask questions about STIs and HIV. You don't know what conversations did or did not take place. Just because someone has been charged with something does not mean that is what transpired. So I think that's the other thing too. People automatically run with like, oh, I see HIV, they're guilty, they're trying to infect someone. I'm like, you literally don't know what has occurred and what this person has done in their relationship.
Yeah, but that's just gonna be the pity in me the next time, because again, I'm not just going to assume. We know that, I don't want to say most people, but I'm gonna say certain people has had an STI. Unfortunately, it is what it is. Hopefully cured it, you know, being responsible, just get it over with, get it treated, get on your antibiotics or whatever, and keep it pushing and know better going forward. No, it is what it is.
But a way to combat that, nephew, is be random in your posts. Just be random. I don't post everything on Facebook, but you can be random and let your random post be, but say it like Jada said it. How you know? Y'all know about this? You know, how you know? You know, let me tell you. And just don't say, oh, just say, okay, bye. That's what I do. And, you know, a lot of people will, you know, be scrolling, you know, doom scrolling like we always do. And like, you know, and they may not say nothing, but you put it out there. And it's just a thing, and you keep it pushing.
I got you. Any other responses?
Oh, I definitely support putting the right stuff out there and just you know, enforcing that information, because just as much as the negativity is out there, we need to push the facts and the things that we know. I personally, another tactic is I don't encourage people to share the media stuff, because it's not. I mean, we talk about misinformation, and it's not even fully informed information. And so, but we know law enforcement is going to continue to do what they're doing. In fact, even now, if people haven't noticed on your social media, especially Facebook, legal law enforcement has gone 100% with posting and embarrassing people for all sorts of offenses that are out there. And so just imagine if they were already, just know that they were already doing that for people living with HIV. I just think about it now. They got some savvy people working their social media to really put people on blast regarding all sorts of offenses. So I can only just, imagine it 10 times for someone that's being charged with HIV. I think the last case I remember was a police officer that was, someone that works in law enforcement now being on the other side of the law, facing HIV charges. And so the other part of this, I want to say, I've kind of given up on people. I think for those that have the energy to continue to educate, to do it. But for me, I'm more wanting to go hold the folks that should be accountable, folks that work in public health, folks that are in the legal system, folks that is other institutions that make the decisions that allow for HIV to happen the way that it does, and also allow for HIV criminalization, because they're the ones that being left off the hook here. Everybody in the community is being impacted, affected in all sorts of ways, and still having to be responsible. But what about the people who should be putting out the right public health information, the messaging and everything? We as the community are doing that work for them, and they just kind of act like they remain neutral in it. And so the media, they're accountable. They should be held accountable for the way that they continue to enforce, or the way they choose to inform or sensationalize this issue, and continue to bring harm and confusion to the community at large.
So back to your point, what you said, Robert, just then, social media. Yeah, I didn't think about that just until you just said it. Social media is responsible, because just think about how when the epidemic did start in the 1980s, the way it was, it was basically through media itself, was hysteria, basically. There was no, I would say, I'm not going to say there was no, but it was not a lot, I would say, as far as real journalism, as far as trying to get all of the facts, showing the humanity of it. Of course, I did, do research and saw how certain people did react to it, as far as their, I would say, public figures like, Elizabeth Taylor or, Princess Diana, the way they responded to, and the way it was shown through social media on how they actually cared for those, living or dying, unfortunately, then with, from complications of HIV or AIDS. So, that was, I would say, a silver lining right there through social, not social media, through media in general, because there was no social media then. But in media, they are, I would say, solely, I would say not solely, but they have a responsibility on, if they actually care, in the sense, on how, it is, I would say, presented itself. So, yeah, I do agree with that.
Yeah, that is the first part of what you said is true. Historically speaking, there are the national editorials. I was going to name them, but I'm not going to do that. But a lot of the major editorials were responsible for, because what was happening was they saw that sex workers were being arrested and they were being accused of having HIV, and then they were being let go. And so that's part of the reasons why these laws have become felonies. Because and they wanted to come down on sex workers, particularly because they looked at them going to jail or being arrested as like a rotating door. They're arrested and they're in and they're out. And so a lot of the media did push or added pressure out there on legislators and any of the officials at that time for them to do something about AIDS, as they say. Do something about AIDS and the people that they are assuming are cause of that. And I know that sex workers are people who were involved soliciting prostitution in the at that time were being blamed and accused. And so that's what we see now is the result of what happened 45 years ago.
Gotcha. Anyone else want to add to this?
I'm going to say just to the point of the miseducation on social media. I hear, Robert, I hear what you're saying. Sanjay, I hear you. We just in general, those of us who are in this fight, I work in public health. I've been in public health for 10 years, and it is exhausting. It is very exhausting. However, because I recognize that social media is the platform of choice for a lot of people, and I'm in a lot of different groups, and I'm afforded the opportunity to just kind of lurk around and just see, what people are talking about. I'm in all types of, groups on social media, groups for people who are dating, groups for people not just dating, but maybe dating over 40, or people who are, I don't know, wanting to hold out for marriage, and just, everything in between. And I think that the question of that I see most often is, will you date someone, or have you dated someone who is living with HIV? And I've seen the comments, and I've seen the venom and the miseducation and the misinformation that is just put out there. It's unbelievable. And really what I encourage people and I charge people to do is in the year of 2026, we have so many different avenues and so many different access to resource. To me, and this is just me, there is no reason for someone to not be able to use those same fingers that they were able to put out that misinformation on this social media platform, that they can't use something as simple as Google or Chat GPT or Claude or anything like that. Phone a friend, ask someone. There's too much information and just too many resources available out there. So for me, I make it my mission to, even through being exhausted, right? I make it my mission to educate. That's who I am at the core. I feel like I do it for, when people jump in the comments and they want to say racist things, or they want to be, they want to be a bigot, or they want to talk about LGBTQ community, and when they want to just spew all this negativity. I got time. Okay, I make time. And sometimes I even have to hold back, because I have to realize I have a whole life. I have a career. I have, a child, and I have, I'm a part of D9. So I use my D9 platform and access to the community that way to bring awareness and further education. I hear your hearts, and I know where we are, and I understand, like, it is exhausting, but I also feel like, as long as we continue to be in the fight, we don't unfortunately have the opportunity to really just give up, walk away, because I feel like as long as we are here, and as long as we have the knowledge, we are equipped with the information and the education to be able to educate others so that they can make informed decisions, empowering them. So I'm not going to enable anyone, but I am going to empower you by giving you the resources and the tools to go ahead and continue using those fingers to do a lot of the research and continue on in educating yourselves and educating your community about not only HIV, but criminalization and how it's impacting those who are already marginalized.
Yeah, I agree. So basically, we need to encourage critical thinking.
Yes, absolutely.
I guess.
Yeah, but our country is severely health illiterate. They really are. And from legislators on down, very illiterate when it comes to health.
All right. So my next question is, I'm looking at it right now.
I don't know if I can, I'm going to say this last thing.
Mm-hmm.
I'm sorry. I was going to say, I just want to say this last thing. I don't know if I can necessarily say that everyone or anyone is intentionally, or not intentionally, but like that they just don't know. I think that there are people out here who choose not to know. I think that there are people here who choose to hang on to the negative side of that, who choose to, like, legislators know what the impact is. That's what their entire job is when they are there on making decisions on behalf of their constituents. They know the numbers, they have the data, they know who's impacted and who's not. And I think that fits an agenda. And so I'm sorry, Sanjay, I had to just say that. I had to get that off my desk, because, sometimes I want to be that person to say, oh, these people don't know. There are some people, like maybe on the lower level, who aren't in the fight like that. They don't know. But legislators, the people who make the decisions for us, where our lives and everything that impacts us is in their hands, voting matters, right? And I know we talked about this last time on the last podcast, Sanjay, but voting matters. And those individuals I hold accountable primarily because they do know, and they know the impact. They hear from constituents like us to tell them what the impact is. They see the numbers just like we see them, and they still make the decision to fit a narrative based on their own beliefs and who they feel deserves access, or, to be, you know what I mean? Like, I don't know. I'm gonna just leave it there, but that's kind of my thought process with that.
No, I definitely get it. So the next question is, or they can kind of be combined, but my next question is basically, to basically know your state laws. Of course, I believe, KK, you mentioned, where you live in Oklahoma, correct? You mentioned some like the law there, but of course, I would say it's not necessarily like a question, but of a mention. I would say in sort of to protect yourself in other ways, but that's one of the ways I would say is to know the laws in your state. For those who may be watching, or share it with someone that's in a different state or whatever, it is to know the actual law, and and I just know it, but comprehend it and understand it, and the nuance of it, because again, it's just not exactly what you read. You have to understand the law. I would say your law brain, try to adapt to a law brain, because again, wording, of course, in law is very different, as far as its meaning and things like that or whatever. So I think that is very important in your state. Of course, in Arkansas, we know that if you knowingly expose someone, basically, you know, also it boils down to disclosure. If you do not tell anyone, of course, have no proof of that. Most cases, you know, you are automatically tried, basically. Especially if you are, when I say knowing, that means that you know you have the virus, whether you're undetectable or not. And of course, I believe that does discourage again testing, because again, you know, once you are tested, you know, here in Arkansas, it is in the system now, basically. So if it's researched, you know, after someone tried to report you or anything like that, if they go back into the system and see your name, whatever system it is, or medical whatever it is, they see that, they know you have the virus. Okay, now they're going to try to charge you because you're in the system. So I think those who don't want to get tested, you know, I think, you know, well, I would say no. Let me not say that. No, it discourages this testing in general, because again, if you knowingly know your status, basically, you're up to be tried if someone reports you, basically. And then, of course, with disclosure, it's very tricky, because again, you can try to protect yourself by word, well, not word, but you know, through text or a letter or whatever, you know, decide to tell someone, that can be used against you, or you know, broadcast on social media, hey, this person got this, whatever, you know, I tried to tell them, but you know, now your business is out there, whether you know, told them or not, you know, you told them, and now your business is out there, basically. So I would say, you know, in your state, just know your laws, pretty much. Anyone else want to say something?
I also just wanted to add, outside of like, when Sanjay says know your law, like you need to know what conduct you could be criminalized for, like what the penalties are. If there's more than one law, if it's in the public health code, if it's in the criminal code. CHLP does have a source book that breaks down the different laws and policies that could be used to criminalize people living with HIV and other stigmatized health conditions. So it's our source book, and I encourage folks to check that out so they can be knowledgeable about what the laws are in their state. And I think people need to also realize that your state doesn't have to have an HIV specific law for you to be criminalized based on your HIV status. I think people often think like, oh, I'm safe, my state doesn't have a law. And I'm like, well, that couldn't be further from the truth. I mean, you could be charged with anything based on your HIV status. Folks have been charged with attempted murder. They've been charged with bioterrorism, aggravated assault. It does not have to be under an HIV specific statute or law. So even if that is not there, you should be taking what steps you can and feel safe taking to try and protect yourself as much as possible. And what I mean by that is like documenting conversations about disclosure, right? I know, Sanjay, you mentioned verbal disclosure. I'm like, I know people sometimes sign love contracts. Sometimes they take folks, if they feel safe with that partner, they take them to the doctor and they have them notate it in the file. I just think you have to do what you can to make sure that you're safe. And whatever that means for you, I encourage you to do it. I know everyone is not as open with their status, but make sure that you understand what the law is and what you could be criminalized for is what I would say.
Mm-hmm. Right. Anyone else want to add? Mm-hmm. All right, so I guess not. So the next question is basically, I actually want Jada actually to speak on this, because and the only reason is because I know at a conference last year in DC and in a call again earlier, you know, I think last month, it was mentioned again, basically how, or the process of collaborating and educating public defenders when cases like these arise. And, you know, so for her to touch on this for a little bit, or, you know, quite a bit, and then we'll go on to the last question, but I want her, in a sense. So of course, y'all can jump in too, basically, if you have any thoughts or questions, whatever. I want her to jump on this question. So could you touch on that a bit, Ms. Jada?
Yes, because I think this is so crucial. And I actually think public defenders should be getting this education before they have a case that comes across their desk, right? As I said, when I was a prosecutor, I had no ideas that these laws existed. I am sure there are plenty of defense attorneys and public defenders specifically that literally have no idea that someone could be criminalized based on their HIV status. And so I think if you're in a position or involved in an organization where you can offer that education, we do try and incentivize by doing like continuing legal education. So they get something from the training as well. But really trying to do that targeted outreach to educate defense attorneys on the front end is something that I think is really important and underutilized, because it really is about those relationships and being able to network to get those opportunities as well. But when someone has a case and it comes across their desk, it's important for them to understand what HIV criminalization is, what the statute actually does and does not require, where the law differs in terms of what we know about current medical and scientific evidence. So these attorneys, you have to think, they're not in our spaces. They're not always public health attorneys. They don't know what viral suppression is most of the time. They don't know what U equals U is, right? Undetectable, untransmittable. They don't realize that there are other ways to try and prevent transmission besides being virally suppressed. They don't even understand the likelihood of transmission that's associated with different types of conduct. So we offer technical assistance to attorneys that are representing folks to try and really understand that legal framework, like trying to protect folks with HIV from their status being disclosed in open court, trying to look at what constitutional arguments can be brought, like what is there something we can argue under the Americans with Disabilities Act? Can we bring in a disability rights argument? So really trying to offer that foundational education and also technical assistance and support, making sure that they have a knowledgeable expert. And, there are different ways to help as well, right? So like there's a really active coalition in Louisiana. There was a case, it might have been a year or so ago at this point, 2 years ago, where we worked with the attorney to pack out the courtroom. We wanted the courtroom to know that folks in the community were paying attention to that case. And they showed up in their shirts and they knew people were paying attention, right? People cared. We also contacted other large organizations to get them to write letters of support about why this person shouldn't face criminalization. We were able to connect them with a free expert to testify. So really trying to give them all the tools in their toolbox that they can use so that public defenders know they're not navigating it alone, but there are advocates, there's organizations, there's community that have the expertise and who can help them understand the science and the law, right? So, and I think on top of that, letting them know that their client is supported, making sure their client is connected to services and care. Are they getting their medication if they're incarcerated? Or even if they're not incarcerated, are they connected to care? Like, what can we do to support your client, even outside of just the direct threat to their life right now, which is the criminalization? How do we are we making sure we're tackling these structural barriers too? So there's so many levels to offering support and trying to educate public defenders and attorneys in general. I don't know if anybody wants to add on to that, Sanjay, but that's like okay. Overall kind of how I would answer that question.
Mm-hmm. All right. Anyone else before I go to the last question? Mm-hmm. All right. So this is just like a speed round just to end the podcast. So basically, my last question was, what do you hope or, what you desire for others to learn from this podcast or this topic? And I'm on KK to go first. Just a quick speed round.
What I really want for people to take away from this is that HIV is not a death sentence and it's not a life sentence. It is not something that should be criminalized. I think that, of course, education, knowledge is power, and I do empower and encourage people to know more about it, about HIV, about criminalization, about what that looks like in your community, and just ways that you can actually be a part of the decriminalization strategy in certain areas.
Okay. All right. Thank you for that. Robert?
I will just add, if for those that are concerned about folks disclosing, if we want people to disclose, then we need to make it legally safe to do that. Right now, it's not legally safe for folks living with HIV to do that, which is why we're doing this work and why it's important for you to educate and be informed. And again, not really interested in, address. Right now, we're addressing the symptoms of what's happening, and I would want to encourage those that work in spaces to where we can really get to the root cause of why this is happening. And a lot of it is really looking within ourselves and to figure out why we, as it was said earlier, why should we be punishing people living with HIV? Because right now, the burden is right now on people living with HIV to protect all of us. And we all have a responsibility for those of us that are living with HIV to remain in treatment and get the things that we need. But if you're not living with HIV, you have a responsibility to protect yourself and get on those treatments that prevent you from contracting HIV in the first place.
And I'll just say before I go to anyone else that I just really hope that they learn at least the critical thinking part skills, like as KK mentioned, as far as using the resources we have now, as far as the internet. You can use your internet, to be behind the screen to pour out your vitriol, hate, or ignorance, stuff like that. But try best to encourage critical thinking, of course, or take it upon yourself, being accountable to actually do some research and hopefully, you believe in yourself to be well educated, certain things. So that's what I really, really hope, with that. So this is, hopefully someone will be educated on this and, take on the initiative to actually, open their minds and, dig into it, this issue itself. Yes, it may be overwhelming, dealing with other things you may have going on in your life or in the world, whatever, or other social issues, but, have that critical thinking mind cap on, basically. So next I'm going to go to my Aunt Angie.
What I hope people get, I just want people to get curious. I know we were here for a very short time and we said a lot of things and a lot of good information that got me curious, but to get curious about where you are locally and find out what the laws and everything are there. Get curious on what the lawmakers that you have to vote for, where they stand, and just get curious and also be supportive to whomever in your life, whether it's something, whether it's HIV or whether it's some other kind of STI or STD, or just be supportive. And you can be supportive by being curious and getting educated on it. And also just being there and being an ear and, standing by what, the person is going through. You can be supportive by just listening, giving, staying there, crying, whatever it takes, just be supportive.
Mm-hmm. Yes, I do appreciate that. Jada?
Man, so many great answers already. I'm just like, ooh, I want to steal all of those. But I guess like the only thing that I'll add that I hope people will take away from this conversation is they could one day be a person living with HIV. It's really easy to think of this as something that won't ever affect you and that will only affect others. And that's just so far from the truth. I mean, you could be in a monogamous relationship in your mind and still end up contracting HIV. And it's okay if that happens. It's not the end of the world. It isn't a death sentence. There's community here to support you. and that we really should not be treating people as vectors of disease based on their health status. It's not healthy for anyone to think of any health condition in that way.
Thank you for that, Jada. And lastly, but Will?
Yes, so I just want to let everybody know that, like last time, HIV is not a crime, and just be kind to each other. I think we have lost a lot of the humanity among each other, and see all of these beautiful people, and just be kind to each other. I know there's a lot to be done, but in the meantime, just be kind and talk to each other. That's something that I do with my friends. I just do it one on one. I think one person at a time sometimes can do more impact, and we need to talk to each other. Just don't close your mind. Just keep your mind forward. And thank you, Sanjay, for this opportunity, and take care to each other.
All right. Well, that does conclude our show. Everyone that has watched, thank you for those who have tuned in. And of course, for all of you, please share this, live with, colleagues, whoever may desire to watch, just please share this. And again, thank you for everyone. And of course, the panelists for being on. So I'm going to end the show now. Thank you.